All right, listen up, Rotogrinders. It's the Ownership Report, week number 5, NFL DFS. My name is Chris Gimino, ownership projection analyst for Rotogrinders, and joining me for week number 5 to go over the numbers is Mr. Title 05, Dan Gaspar. Dan, this is the time of week where we get to take the ownership information that we've collected from early in the week, all the projections, all the shows that have given takes on ownership, crumple that up in our hands in a ball and throw it directly in the trash. What is your absolute favorite reason to not look at ownership early in the week?
As somebody who has started to help in aiding ownership process, mostly for MLB so far, I'm going to be doing more with NBA, but it's very, 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 very difficult to get a refined look early in the day for MLB and early in the week for NFL. There's just so much revolving news, especially on a week like this. We have so many key players on the injury report this week. I think some of those guys are token injuries where they don't actually have injuries and they're going to play, but still that affects ownership. So, I was talking before I was doing the show, the Swolecast early Wednesday. It's just, there's not going to be a truly accurate reflection of ownership or projected ownership, no matter how hard you try or how much time you put into it.
Of course, there's no harm in looking at the fantasy point projections and coming up with an idea of who might be strong plays and therefore trying to ascertain whether or not they'll be highly owned. But there's simply no way to know, for example, that it would be exactly Sterling Shepard out and not Sterling Shepard and Kenny Galladay, or whether or not George Kittle. And actually, we thought George Kittle might actually try to give it a go this week. Looks like he's going to be out. These are just some of the reasons why waiting until the end of the week to make your hard and fast decisions on ownership and really how popular players are going to be. You don't want to get those biases baked in too deep early in the week. Devin, without further ado, let's fire up the RG ownership model and get into the week number 5 numbers so we can start to figure out what's going on here in the National Football League DFS landscape for week 5. Okay, Tuttle. Quarterback position. On DraftKings, it looks pretty tight in between Trey Lance, Dak Prescott, and Daniel Jones for most popular play. Based on the numbers that I ran last night, what are you looking at between these 3 guys? Are these the 3 most popular guys, and do you have a favorite among them if that's true?
They are the 3 most popular, yes. Do I have a favorite among them? Not really, and I think all are completely fadeable for their various reasons. Trey Lance, who we have projected as the highest owned currently, I do think that's how it's going to roll. We haven't seen a whole lot of him, right? We know he just really doesn't, he's still struggling throwing the ball, which is fine because we can still use his rushing points, which is kind of the thesis behind the play. We think he's going to have, they're going to run the ball more often with Trey Lance. He'll be in read options, that sort of thing. But there is a true floor here with Lance for sure. This game could very quickly get ugly, especially without George Kittle now, who you mentioned before. So Kittle not only is a good receiving option, but he's also an excellent blocker for the rushing attack. So no Kittle. I could see Lance. I understand the appeal of Lance. I'll have shares of Lance, but he truly does have a pretty low floor. As far as Dak Prescott goes, we've seen the issue with him. He was hyper efficient last week, but I think he's topped out at 25 passing attempts over the last 3 weeks. The Cowboys, we were kind of happy seeing them in week 1, thinking they're going to be an extremely pass heavy team throughout the entire season. Turns out they maybe aren't. They're going to kind of be opponent based and play or call plays based on, they're actually being smart, which probably didn't really think would happen with the Mike McCarthy led team. But they are, calling game plans, opponent specific game plans, which has kept Dak intact, or in check, I should say. So Prescott's ceiling has not been there either, and he needs to run into a matchup that truly unlocks the passing upside. I'm not saying it's not this week with the Giants, but if you just go off the last 3 weeks of data, like the upside is certainly capped there.
Yeah, against the Chargers, Eagles, and Panthers, no more than 27 pass attempts for Dak, no more than 238 yards. Certainly nothing close to what we saw in week 1. However, if you start to build teams, it's real easy to fall into Dak and to Daniel Jones because you're going to have 2 easy double stacks. So the double stack for New York Giants is very cheap. The double stack for the Cowboys is very highly projected from a median fantasy points perspective. So that game stack is going to be quite popular here. Whether or not you think it's fadeable in tournaments, you certainly can expect to have lots of friends along with you for the ride. I have Kyler Murray as the next highest owned quarterback, but I think the problem that I have with this projection that I really want to get your opinion on is, it's difficult to make that stack with the guys that you were going to want if you are going to run it with a bring back. Let's say you want, on DraftKings specifically, you want Kyler Murray, and then if you try to get DeAndre Hopkins, you're already going to put yourself in a little bit of a corner because it's going to be difficult to get Debo on the backside. If you take one of the lower guys, then you're getting into a situation where the target share is a little bit less predictable. The bringbacks on the San Francisco side start to get limited really quickly once you get past Debo Samuel. You're looking at Dwelly or something. So it's really a difficult stack to make. Do you think we'll see Kyler Murray full game stacks this week, or are we going to be looking at more solo skinny stacks and other less correlated action?
I think less correlated action. I think the stack you'll see is Trey Lance paired with somebody, bring it back with Hopkins. You won't necessarily see it the Kyler side. You mentioned it, price tag is the prohibitive factor here. And you mentioned if you want to do it with Hopkins, it's even more difficult. Chase Edmonds, who we might want to do it with, he's got one of those game time decision tags, which is going to be difficult with him being on playing in one of the late games. I think Murray, I would not be surprised if he came in even lower than what we have projected. Again, because we're like Devonta Adams going to soak up ownership, Derrick Henry going to soak up ownership. Playing all 3 of those guys together is not very easy to do.
He's one of the top projected players on the whole slate, so it's natural that the modeling that we'll use is going to want to expect him to be owned. But now you take a look at that this factor of correlation built in here, and it's a little bit more difficult to see him getting as. I'm sure he'll have some ownership, especially on FanDuel. FanDuel's probably a different story. It's still reasonably tight on that site as far as the price is concerned, but I think the 8,500 price tag not quite as prohibitive as the 8,000 on DraftKings. Now, getting down the list here before we wrap up and move on to the other positions, I think Tom Brady might be the only other quarterback that truly qualifies as chalky even a little bit here, and it's only because the combinations of receivers that you're going to get here with Godwin, Antonio Brown, to a lesser extent Mike Evans, they're on the cheaper side, and I think you can maybe make a quality stack with this. The problem is the bring back, and the problem is are people really going to expect this game to be pass heavy for the Buccaneers? What are you doing with Tom Brady? Is he also in this Kyler Murray category of potentially over projected from an ownership standpoint?
I think so, yes. And playing into that is the fact that Fournette's going to be chalked this week. So like they're not like, it's fine to pair them together, but it's not a natural pairing to pair Fournette and Tom Brady together. So I think that will drive Brady's ownership down quite a bit. Like it's tough to predict blowouts, but I truly expect this game to be a massive blowout, which, we've talked about the importance of having a bring back on the other team, something to force the ceiling games out of some of these other high priced players. We could be looking at a spot where Brady's just not suited, just not playing in the fourth quarter for sure here.
Yeah, I think we've got a challenge here with Giovanni Bernard coming back, and that challenge is, what's that really going to mean for Uncle Lenny in terms of his receiving work? So I mean that sort of raises an eyebrow using him in a stack. I'm not that people are really all that enthusiastic about pairing Tom Brady with Leonard Fournette anyway, but it just takes away one cheaper stack partner to maybe lower that ownership a little bit. And I expect that if I try to run this again, I might try to bias that down just a little bit. Now, the rest of the guys pretty much that you're going to come across, do you see anybody on this list here that you can expect to qualify as remotely chalky enough to highly consider their ownership as a factor in your lineup construction? Other than the super low owned guys, of course.
No, Nobody's pushing ownership where I really care. And we get that a lot at the quarterback position, right? Other than the top 3 guys or whatever. It's just don't worry about ownership at the quarterback position as a whole. If you're worrying about ownership, it's worrying about more of the collective stack as a whole, right? So no, I'm not going to worry about Kirk Cousins ownership, but maybe I'll worry about pairing Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson because that could end up being a popular play. Or maybe I worry about pairing Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen because Keenan Allen's really cheap on DraftKings. But in terms of just one-offs or singular ownership, no, I'm not worried at all.
Yeah, Darnold, Herbert, Cousins, Hurts are the guys that I think are probably going to have the best chance to be owned outside of the original top 5 guys. But I don't think we're going to be really that concerned individually with the quarterback ownership. As a lineup, as you said, some of those guys are going to be more popular than others in stack situations. Now, at the running back position, once again, I mention this, every week when we talk about dudes like Derrick Henry. Tuttle, on Thrive Fantasy, you don't have to worry about the guys down the list. We don't really have to spend as much time worrying about Giovanni Bernard's status, all these other projections. When we go to prop up on thrivefantasy.com, we're doing it with the intention of doing it with player props and not fantasy points. And that means they're only going to use the top guys. In fact, 20 of the available players are going to be on the list this week. You have to choose 10 of them and build your prop lineup. They're going to be assigned a value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and you're going to rack up the most points, obviously, and win your share of the prize pool. Use promo code Grinders at Thrive Fantasy. Tell your family. thrivefantasy.com. Get up there and sign up and use the promo code Grinders, and they'll receive 100% instant first deposit bonus on their action, up to $250. They can also download the Thrive Fantasy app, on the Apple Store or the Play Store, and you can visit thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prep up today. Now, Derrick Henry, going to be popular. Is he going to be more popular than 25%? Because, quite frankly, the running back position isn't loaded with great options. The salary cap's pretty tight. That's probably the only thing holding him back. Talk about it. Derrick Henry, is he going to be the chalk?
Yes, 100% the chalk. Like I found myself trying to take the more balanced approach with lineup building, and it's just like, man, he's going to smash. It's just a matter of if he smashes enough to make the lineup construction the optimal lineup construction. So again, if you're fading Henry, it's not like, hey, I think Derrick Henry's a bad play this week. I don't think he's going to get 30 points this week. There are scenarios, as crazy as it sounds, where Derrick Henry scores 30 points and it's just not optimal because he's $9,000. But people will see, hey, such a great spot, we're going to jam him in. So yeah, he's going to be the highest owned for sure. And it really is a mental hurdle to fade somebody like this that's getting the work that he is.
I don't know if the touchdown props over there on Thrive Fantasy, but Derrick Henry as likely as anyone in the world to score a touchdown on this particular Sunday against the Jaguars here. I would actually be more surprised if he doesn't score. I think really what's at stake here is, is he going to get that target share he's been getting this year? Is he going to get over the 100-yard bonus? Pretty likely on the latter, not as sure about the former. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But Derrick Henry definitely I'm not going to dissuade anyone from playing him, even though we normally do like to say, hey, don't play Derrick Henry when he's the chalk. It's a little bit more difficult in these kind of spots where it's just so likely that he's going to put up fantasy points. Naji Harris hasn't been as likely to put up fantasy points, and the matchup is certainly nothing to get excited about here against Denver. However, the role in the passing game specifically for DraftKings makes him very difficult to ignore. Do you think he's going to be popular? And if so, are you actually going to lean in this direction in a tougher matchup?
He will be popular. I will probably not have a ton of him, and it's not because I don't think he's a good play. Some of it is matchup based, right? I try not to weight matchups too heavily, but the reality is this game could just be so ugly. Very, very low scoring. And like, is he going to continue to run into close to double-digit targets on a weekly basis? Probably not. So yeah, I'm unlikely to be overweight on the field here. I'll have some of him, and I think he's a fine play. It's just matchup driven. I'm probably going to be underweight here.
Yeah, we also can't afford nice things, especially if you're playing Derrick Henry, it's going to be a little bit harder to get him. I mean, you can make this happen. It's just there's some considerations at play here with the 6.9 price tag on DraftKings. Also, Costs a decent amount over on FanDuel at 7.3, although I would say that is significantly better than the price you are getting on DraftKings. So maybe expect him to be more owned on that site. Now, okay, let's talk about the cheaper options here. They're not dirt cheap, but we got James Robinson, Leonard Fournette, DeAndre Swift, Damian Williams checking in on DraftKings as it's cheap. Damian Williams, by the way, on FanDuel, if you're playing over there, just go ahead and get him in the lineup. 5.8 over there should be extremely popular. What's going on here is David Montgomery's out, so you can expect him to be one of the higher owned guys on that site. But on DraftKings, not as much. That being said, those 4 cheap guys, do you have a favorite?
Of those 4 cheap guys, it probably is James Robinson. He ran into a bigger workload than expected last week with Carlos Hyde being this surprise inactive. And Hyde's kind of mixed in and out in terms of how big or sizable of a role he has. But I think Robinson is still going to have the majority of the work here, backfield work for the Jaguars. So he is my favorite. My least favorite, which you did not ask, but I feel compelled to tell you about, is because you like him on FanDuel, and he is so super cheap. Damian Williams would be the guy. Theoretically, great play, but we've seen it many times before where we assume that a player is going to step into some sort of huge role that his predecessor was in. So we're kind of assuming he's going to jump into a David Montgomery role. I think that's the most likely scenario to happen. I don't think they're going to give Khalil Herbert, the rookie, a lot of work, but it's definitely within the range of outcomes. So if you think Williams is going to be extreme chalk, I would advocate fading him. He's coming in currently where it's like, he's not that way. He's not projecting as extreme chalk. It's kind of like a whatever play for me. But if it was a week where he was coming in north of 20%, I would probably be more inclined to fade him. And so I'm guessing, I'm bringing FanDuel ownership up right now, he's probably closer to that 20% mark on FanDuel.
Oh, he's higher.
Yeah, 28%. So yeah, if you're fading him, he's a much stronger fade on FanDuel. Like, he's the other thing to notice here, like goal line work, especially. Justin Fields, we actually have a rushing quarterback that could take some of that goal line work. Herbert could. The goal line is where I would be most afraid of Herbert mixing in, honestly. So like, in FanDuel, you don't get those points per reception either. So I think he is a pretty strong candidate to go underweight on, just because I think there's much more uncertainty in that situation than the general public or the consensus is alluding to.
I'm going to save a take on this for a little bit later in the show when we get into our low-owned options segment. But yes, I don't love Damian Williams. I don't hate him. He's just sort of there for me, and we'll see how the lineup construction goes as I go to finish up the rest of my lineups this weekend. The other expensive guys that are towards the top of this list, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, and Austin Eckler are the 3 guys that I think are going to be the most popular for good reason. Those are the guys that have the quality roles, I'll call them, in fantasy football as of now that are available on this slate. Is there a particular favorite for you among the rest of those sort of next in line expensive options?
So from a role standpoint, it has to be Saquon Barkley. He's the guy that's going to get the majority of the backfield work for the Giants, and he's stepped up his game as a pass catcher too, and he's more relevant as a pass catcher with all the injuries that they have there. So Barkley definitely has the best and most reliable role, I think. Eckler is intriguing to me. He had his first career 100-yard rushing game, but last week he still, I think, Roundtree and Justin Jackson's now doubtful for this week. I don't think he's suiting up, but still they combined for 14 carries last week, and I believe Eckler had 15. That's fine and dandy. Like, Eckler still has a good enough role. Eckler still has goal line work. There is going to most likely get the goal line work. He still works in as a pass catcher, but as that price continues to creep up, it definitely gets more fragile on ways he can get there at that price tag. So Eckler is probably my least favorite. Kamara would be the guy that I don't love it because I don't think it's a great rushing matchup. And he had 0 targets last week. Derrick Henry has more targets than him on the season. It's quite unbelievable, but I also think this could be a spot where people overreact. People see hey, he got 0 targets. Like, that's not going to be his role. I know his role in general has been pretty terrible this season in the passing game, but maybe we see a shift this week. I don't want to assume that, but if he's going to come in a little bit lower owned, I would be fine taking some shots at that. So I will be most intrigued of this trio to see where Kamara comes in, because I want to see if people are selling on him at this point.
Yeah, it's intriguing that the targets are really not quite as high this season as we would have expected given the situation there for Kamara. But Yahoo, what doing with Saifon Barkley at $23, by the way? Go ahead and consider Saquon Barkley. He's going to be popular as a result of that, obviously. But, this is one of those situations where the price tag is basically demanding that you take a look here at $23, because that's quite frankly about, I don't know, maybe $10 too inexpensive for him. It's not, it's definitely cheap. So you go ahead and get Saquon Barkley over on Yahoo. All right. Any other takes here as far as the chalk running backs are concerned? Nobody else that I see on this list stands out. Shout out to Chuba Hubbard, by the way, who got, and I think he played 0 third down snaps last week. I didn't see the exact tally, but I saw that they had Rodney Smith out there on third down. So if he's not going to be involved in the passing game, we can definitely throw out the window the idea that he's Christian McCaffrey. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
I don't think it's unfair to have his projection pretty low here in week number 5 from an ownership perspective. By the way, any other takes here?
Swift is the most intriguing of the guys that we haven't talked about in terms of, when I first opened this slate, started looking, I think it was Monday, I was like, oh, Swift's going to be just the chalk. And I don't think he will be. We have him still with a healthy ownership projection here. But I don't think he's going to be massive chalk. And we've kind of had, he's got the injury tag going in. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's had the Q tag every week so far this season. So it is kind of whatever at this point. But TJ Hawkinson is leaning more actually questionable. If Hawkinson's unable to go, where are they going to throw the ball? Right. They just have nobody.
Quintez Cephas, Tuttle. I mean,
my boy.
Where's Tom? Cephas. Where's the accountant? Tom Kennedy sounds like your accountant, according to Alex Dunlap at Roster Watch. Are we going to see Tom Kennedy out there? Who are they going to throw to exactly?
Yeah.
I think they have a pretty, low level tight end behind Hawkinson. So,
yep.
That situation. Alize Mack, is he still on the team? He was there in preseason. I know that, but not much going on.
I don't know who their backup tight end is.
Yeah, well, that's the situation. So the point is, DeAndre Swift is going to be in line for a prominent role in the passing game, I assume.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on to talking about some of the wide receivers on this slate. These are the kind of wide receivers at the top of this board that you can go ahead and bring right on over to the DFS OGs League. That's where you can go and play against guys like Beer Makers Fan, Head Shopper, Notorious. That's going to be on FanDuel, Tuttle. So if you want to go ahead and play against those guys and beat their asses, get onto the front page of Rotogrinders, sign up for the DFS OGs League, get your share of the prize pool. Here in week number 5, Devonta Adams will probably be pretty popular in that particular contest. He's 8.2 on DraftKings, and I have him as the highest owned wide receiver. I think that makes a lot of sense. His target share is above 30 at this point in time as far as our projections are concerned. I think that's correct, and I think this ownership's correct. Are you going to be playing Devontae?
Yeah, for sure. I had a pretty strong take on him last week. I'm not kind of disappointed last week. What did he even finish with? I was at a wedding all week, but I know it was 6 for 64, scoreless. Whatever. You mentioned it, 30% target share. He's going to get so I love him. And I will have plenty of him. And I like both sides of this game. I looked at the totals to start the week and was a little bit surprised at how I was kind of hoping this game would go under the radar a bit. And I don't think it will, because it is a pace down spot. Neither team plays extremely fast. But if Joe Mixon is unable to suit up, I do think we're looking at a spot where both passing attacks just drop back a decent amount. And I think that both will be super efficient. So I like both sides of this game. I like Devonta Adams. I like T. Higgins. I like Jamar Chase. Tyler Boyd, the guy I'm probably leaving out of the stacks and the bringbacks, and he's probably the guy that's going to go for 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he's the guy I find myself leaving out the most.
Yeah, it's definitely when I start to build, set up the stack settings in lineup HQ and run, give me 2 guys from one team, 1 guy from the other team. I'm getting more stacks with the Burrow side of this, with two of theirs receivers bringing it back with Devonta, than I am getting, a couple of Packers. Because let's face it, you're talking about Tunyon, Aaron Jones, and then
Randall
whichever
Cobb,
one
baby.
of the. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You have fun with Randall Cobb. He's not scoring again this week. I was going to make a dumb bet, but let's just say that I'm confident that we won't see more Randall Cobb this week, and we will see probably plenty of Devonta Adams, which is why he'll be the most popular wide receiver on the slate. He's going to score. Okay. Now, we talked earlier about this CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper situation, and to a lesser extent, we've got Kadarius Toney at 4K and Kenny Golladay at 5.9. That whole Dallas New York Giants game should find a lot of wide receivers in people's lineups here. Do you have any words of caution or any words of encouragement for this particular strategy? Because, there's definitely like a knife's edge here where it could go either way. For me, I love CeeDee Lamb. Tell me what you're thinking about these guys.
I can't quit CeeDee Lamb, even though it's been bad. It hasn't been a fun ride. The big issue here is we talked about Dak Prescott's lack of volume over the last 3 weeks, and that has crushed both CD and Amari Cooper, really, especially with Dalton Schultz being the guy that's randomly popped off. Dalton Schultz isn't going to continue to pop off. He's not that good. CD's going to get his. Amari's going to get his. It's just a matter of if they can do it in the same game or not. At this point, it seems less likely than more likely, but I like CD over Amari. Amari has all those injuries. I played CD last week, and I thought, hey, Amari goes down, CD's going to get funneled. Amari comes back, scores the touchdown. Not fun. In terms of the Giant side of the ball, I do think if you're making stacks to this game, and it's showing in the ownership here, I do think Kenny Golladay is going to be the lesser owned Giants wide receiver. Like, he'll be lower owned than Evan Ingram. He'll be lower owned than Kadarius Toney. So he is a guy that if I'm making stacks of this game, I actually kind of want to prioritize Kenny Golladay over Toney, because I do think Galladay's role is better overall too. And the price tag is just what's driving the ownership down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it depends where you're playing, because he's 6.2 on FanDuel, so $300 more expensive than DraftKings. That's not enough. And then on Yahoo, he's $18. So those two particular sites, Golladay, he's priced basically based on his performance this year instead of what we think his median performance will be. He's got 3 games that are lackluster, just the last game where it looked like himself at all. If he had done that 17.6, he'd be more expensive on those two other sites. So I think he will get some more ownership there. But you're exactly right on DraftKings. Kadarius Toney is 4K. This is a spot where we saw him sort of emerge last week. 9 targets. I guess that's something to get excited about here for the young player, and they're going to be missing some options again. So yeah, it seems pretty clear that Toney's going to be the guy more owned than Golladay for the Giants. Now, you mentioned Keenan Allen earlier in the show. Talk about this situation, 6.5. There was some speculation that maybe Mike Williams is the number 1 here. Doesn't seem to be the case from my perspective. 6.5 seems too cheap. Are you going to be able to play him in this tougher matchup with Cleveland?
Yeah, 100%. And I honestly don't think it's that tough of a matchup either. We've seen Cleveland the last couple of weeks. They performed better defensively. Obviously, the pressure is the biggest issue here. But Herbert's actually performed pretty well. I don't have his metrics in front of me under pressure, but I know they're actually pretty strong. So no, I'm not afraid to play Keenan Allen at this price tag. I do think he's wide receiver 1. He clearly has the safest volume in this passing attack. So I like Keenan Allen quite a bit. I was hoping his ownership would come in at a lower point, because I do think he's a very good play this week.
I was unsure last week about some of these cheaper options that were going down the board here as far as whether or not they would be owned. Namely, Curtis Samuel was the biggest question mark I had. He ended up getting some run last week, and he's still 3K again this week. My concern here is that with how kind of tight the pricing is on DraftKings here, is Curtis Samuel going to creep up the board the way I have it here to, into the mid-teens or higher, just to help make that roster construction effort a little bit easier, because they're missing guys on offense. They're not going to have Dimey Brown. They're not going to have Logan Thomas. And 3K just seems really cheap. Am I under projecting Curtis Samuel here, or is this about right for what we can expect in week 5?
I think it's probably about right. Do you know what he came in at exactly last week, or close enough to what it was?
I looked it up quickly, but if you want to talk about just as far as whether you think he's going to get any production week, I think that's the real key, because we don't even have to have this conversation if we think he's going to get, 4 or more targets like he got last week. He's been questionable all week, so I think that's the main thing here. But 3K is just too cheap for where I would have projected him before the season started. I would have projected him way above this level in terms of fantasy production if he was fully healthy.
So I think one thing that's going to keep his ownership in check is Ricky Seals-Jones is probably going to be chalk at tight end at 2,500. That opens up a lot of, not only does that open up salary a lot on DraftKings, allows you to work different ways, but it also, like, people aren't, even though it's extremely cheap, even though they're only 5,500 combined, people don't want to necessarily pencil in 2 offensive pieces from the Washington football team in the same lineup. So like, I do think Ricky Seals-Jones projected ownership will push Curtis Samuel's ownership down a little bit. This is probably pretty close to what we have. And really it's just all about if he sees an expanded role or not. I assume he will continue to see an expanded role. 4 targets, like you said, he's even good enough almost at this price point to open up things. But I think this projection is pretty accurate.
He was 12% in the Wildcat last week. So that's a pretty good indication that people were not sleeping on it, to say the least. And now we've got a whole nother week here to sit on the news and really make something out of it. A couple other players out of the lineup. I think he'll be pretty popular here this week. As will Jacoby Myers. I mean, this is a name that we haven't really spoken that much about this year, but target share's there, 5.6. If people are going to follow the projections, they're going to own them. Are people going to follow their fantasy point projections and put them in the lineup?
I think so. And he's super cheap on FanDuel too. I think he's like 5.8 there or something. Yeah, I think people will follow those projections, and they just see Houston too. The only thing that I would worry about ownership wise, I think kind of like the thought processes, or what I've heard the most of, is Damian Harris being touted, right? So perhaps that drops his ownership a little bit, but I don't think enough to matter at all.
Yeah, always tough to get behind the early down back in New England, because once a year there's going to be the 4 touchdown game or whatever, the LeGarrette Blount style pounding when you don't have them. But most of the time you're going to get a fairly modest upside with those guys. But Jacoby Myers, heard this stat someplace this week, not really getting in the end zone all that much in his career. How many times?
Never.
Yeah, that 0 times. That was shocking to me, especially since I know he scored in preseason. So, man, can we get this guy in the end zone this week? Houston's probably a good spot to try that. Definitely on the New England Patriots passing game a little bit, at least from the standpoint of the 2 wide receivers this week. Myers being way more popular. Another guy we'll mention later, not quite as popular. Okay, Deebo Samuel, 7.1. DJ Moore is 7.5. Both of these guys have had huge seasons so far. Are we going to see the ownership to follow here in week 5? That's the way we're projecting it now.
Yes. I do think Moore's role is the most stable, especially with the new quarterback change coming in. I really think, and less so this week since Kittle's out, but I wrote last week in the grind down. You can check that out on rotogrinders.com. And I wrote the same thing this week. I think ideal world for Kyle Shanahan is just run. Limit what his quarterbacks can do in terms of throwing the ball, because he doesn't want to throw the ball a whole lot. And that really is going to make it hard for Deebo on a weekly basis to see the volume. He's seen the volume so far this season, but I really do strongly feel that 10 targets a week thing is not going to happen very often for him. And so at his price tag at 7,100, if he's, coming in where we have him projected, I think he's a pretty strong tournament fade for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a lean towards him in those stacks with Trey Lance. So you're going to start, you're going to start to at least see the lineup start the same way when you get a Trey Lance lineup most of the time. And as far as how you finish it, not as many ways to stay the same there. So I'm not that worried about a Deebo Samuel stack from a unique lineup perspective. But as far as whether or not he can continue the run, I think that's a different question. I love Deebo, so I'm not going to be fading him in full, but I do understand where you're coming from there. Okay, last question here before we get on to the tight ends. Are there any other guys down past this 13% mark that you think have a chance to creep up the board and really give us something to think about as far as whether or not we should be considering them as fades?
I don't think anyone will steam high enough where you have to consider fading. I do think guys like AJ Brown could see a little increase in ownership. I would not be surprised if Jamar Chase, also some of these Cincinnati guys that we're talking about, their price tags just stick out to me is attractive. And you mentioned it. You go to a lineup builder, you type in, Stack Finder, and those are the guys that are popping. So yeah, like AJ Brown, Jamar Chase, would not be surprised if they hit like the 15% mark, but I don't think they're going to creep much higher than that.
I think that'll be more exclusive to DraftKings too, just because of that, just the way that they've laid their pricing out, it's more conducive. You're going to like what you see in the full lineup perspective with that Joe Burrow stack more there than you will somewhere else. There's more ways to get some of the more obvious plays into stacks elsewhere. Whereas on DraftKings, I think you'll see a little bit more of a lean towards that double stack here in Cincinnati. And you mentioned the price tags. That's what makes that possible. Laviska Shenault is a name I want to mention here because it stands out to me as the only one that's not really obvious in terms of, well, I'll just say this. People aren't like falling over themselves to get Jacksonville normally. And we already mentioned playing James Robinson. Can we really have a couple of high-owned Jaguars here, or is this Shenault ownership maybe a couple points too high? What do you think? We got 12%, by the way, if you're not watching the screen share.
Yeah, it's probably pretty accurate. I do think, like, we don't have Robinson. I think Robinson was around 16%. It checks out to me. I do think the one thing, like, I think Laviska Shenault's a fine play this week. And I do like this Tennessee defense is not good. So I'm completely fine taking Jaguars in the spot. The one thing I will mention is like people are taking a look at Laviska's ADOT. Oh, he's got a roll change with DJ Chark. No, he didn't see roll change. He got a long catch on a broken play that was thrown up as a prayer and he caught it. Like his role is the same. He's going to be a low ADOT guy. He's going to get targets, which, hey, that happens to be a good thing on DraftKings where you get the PPR. He's going to get targets. He's got okay touchdown equity. He's a big guy. So like, again, I think he's a fine play. Just don't go expecting, multiple long receptions out of Laviska in this one, unless he just breaks it after the catch. I would expect more somewhere along the lines of like a 6 for 80 yards and a touchdown or something is what's going to get you there.
All right, let's get into the tight end position. The tight end position is full of cheap guys. And if you like shows where you can hear somebody historically hate cheap tight end plays more than he should, you can like and subscribe this podcast, listen to it every single week, because over the years, I have faded some of the very best cheap chalk to my own detriment, like Will Dissly chalk week, like Donald Parham chalk week. I've definitely had my fair share of times where I've hated on the cheap chalk. I think this week I'm going to try my best to get up to Darren Waller, even though he'll be fairly popular as it stands. But there's just something about Ricky Seals-Jones that irks me as far as trying to get him in here against New Orleans. Am I going to be crying yet again, Tuttle? It looks like he's going to be pretty popular on DraftKings. What do you think?
He's going to be popular, and I'm completely okay not playing him. This is kind of the same thing. Who was the guy that I was talking about who I mentioned this about? Damian Williams. Almost the same thing. Is we assume that, an injury happens and this guy's going to jump into a full workload. We saw it last week, right? But there's a difference between who you have on your active roster on a week-to-week basis. There's a difference on who's ready to go into an expanded role once an injury happens. So they've had a week to plan. I would not expect nearly 100% of the routes run for Ricky Seals-Jones this week. Like, I think he's going to see a heavy role. He's a fine play for his price tag, but am I going to be shocked if he scores 5 points or less? No, not at all. So at expected high ownership, completely fine going elsewhere. Yeah,
it's a little bit tougher to get off of Evan Ingram's bandwagon here at 3.2. So I'd rather pay the $700 to get the guy who's actually shown to be pretty good. At times, I guess I should say at times, right? Because lately, what's happened to this man? This used to be someone who we were thinking was going to be, almost a wide receiver at the tight end position, right? Or at least someone who could get out there and do a lot of damage in the passing game. We haven't seen it in quite some time. He's getting booed by the fans. So are we going to see another game in which Evan Ingram is booed, this time by the Dallas fans, but nonetheless, not someone who has inspired a lot of confidence with his play? Is he worth the popularity?
See, I'm with you. I think he is a significantly better player than Ricky Seals-Jones. But the thing is, like, are we going off of past? Are we going off of history too much? But I do think he's a significantly better player. Like, we've seen him used in ways that I would not expect Ricky Seals-Jones to be used. So I do think he's worth the popularity. He is my favorite point per dollar tight end play pretty easily on DraftKings.
Yeah, guys like Ross Dwelley is going to replace George Kittle in San Francisco. He's only 2.7, and I think he scored last week. I swear to God, I saw this guy. Yeah, he scored last week, but that was his only target. So I don't know if we can expect or guarantee anything close to a one target for 21 yards and touchdown performance. We'd take it at 2.7, but are you feeling the same kind of love for Dwelley, knowing that he's going to be the main guy?
No, I mean, you can't put him in nearly the same role, obviously, as Kittle. That's completely obvious. He's kind of fine. Like, he's a touchdown dependent play. If he scores a touchdown, you're happy. If he doesn't, you're looking at under 5 points. Kind of the same as Ricky Seals-Jones, basically. I will say I do prefer Ricky Seals-Jones over Ross Dwelley. I would expect Seals-Jones to have more potential upside as an actual passing weapon than I would Dwelley.
There's two other cheap guys that I think are deserving of discussion here on this week. Jared Cook is 3.6 on DraftKings. Cameron Brate is 3.3. Fantasy point projections for both these guys look pretty good. I think we're a little bit hotter on Cook than some other spots, but Cameron Brate certainly got the Tom Brady connection here. Do you like either of these guys as pivots at slightly lower ownership?
Fine. Meh. Kind of like neither excite me. Yeah. But that's the story of all these guys down here, right? It's exactly same story. You're open for a touchdown. If you don't get it, you're looking at single digit points. It's kind of what the tight end position is when you don't have Travis Kelce on it. Darren Waller is the sole exception basically this week of the guys that could actually break the slate with 30 more points or something like that. That's Darren Waller. That's the only guy. TJ Hawkinson would be the next tier for me is potential. But again, he's dealing with an injury. He seems to be legitimately questionable. But other than Waller or Hawkinson, it's you play a guy, you hope for a touchdown. If you don't get it, you're whatever.
Dalton Schultz has been doing some slate breaking of his own. He's 4.4 here. I don't know if I call it slate breaking, but he's certainly been getting production. 26, that's a definite slate breaker here for Dalton Schultz. So, is this price tag going up going to push his ownership down the way we have it projected?
I think so, yes. And just the other cheap options at this position, I think will definitely lower the ownership.
That could be, if you want to make this Dallas stack, that could be an interesting way to try to do it and get a little bit different. You're certainly fighting that headwind of, performed well lately, which is usually something you want to try to get away from. If you're, if the guy's been scoring a lot of fantasy points, that's usually going to attract a lot of ownership, but the price tag went up and that's going to negate that. So Schultz certainly is still viable on DraftKings, certainly on the other sites where I don't think it'll be very popular at all. So that leaves basically just Noah Fant as like a decently high owned option, right? Like we never have that many options that are any good at tight end to play. But you mentioned Waller. Other than him, is Fant the only other guy that's going to get 5% owned?
Yeah, probably. I mean, yeah, I don't see anybody. I guess I should say Gesicki would be the other guy potentially, right? Like Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker I don't know if he's out or questionable at this point. Devontae Parker, I think it's out. I haven't seen an update on that, but they don't have anybody to throw the ball to. It's gonna be Waddle and Gesicki getting 10 plus targets probably. So Gesicki would be the guy like I'm okay with from a target standpoint. And I do think the projected target share will push Gesicki's ownership up a little bit.
Yep. So not really much to speak of below that. Those are any picks we have there going to be in the low owned segment here. Let's get on to defenses. On DraftKings, significantly different yet again than the other sites as far as what defenses should be expected to be popular, because DraftKings doesn't have this weird, condensation of pricing at defense. They can actually price the Buccaneers at 4.7 and especially the Patriots at 4.9. Boy, can we have a moment of silence for Davis Mills, Tuttle? I mean, this guy is just – he has nothing to work with, and it's just week after week of like what seems like a torture for this young guy. I mean, this guy doesn't have he didn't even have a chance in preseason, let alone against the Patriots defense this week. So certainly on FanDuel, you're going to find the Patriots as a highly owned team. On DraftKings, though, at 4.9, I think they're going to be low. Tell me, how are you getting to the Patriots at 4.9?
See, I do kind of wish you mentioned DraftKings pricing is a bit more dynamic. I do wish they lowered that ceiling a little bit and maybe brought them more towards like the 4K range than the upper 4Ks, because it's just so hard to justify paying up. With that said, pretty easily can see it. You can pay up here to be contrarian, and you get two really good options. I think I slightly prefer the Bucs over the Patriots. Davis Mills is terrible. Jacoby Brissett's terrible. Jacoby Brissett loves to get sacked. Tampa Bay can bring the pressure. They have been terrible this year because they allow a lot in the receiving game. But you don't really have to worry about that a whole lot when Jacoby Brissett's the opposing quarterback, and he doesn't have a whole lot of people to throw to. So I do slightly prefer Buccaneers have taken a shot at one of these teams. But again, clearly 1.8% for the Patriots, 1.9% projected ownership for the Buccaneers. Pay up to be contrarian for sure.
It's time for the chalkiest thing ever, Tuttle, and that thing is advertisements on podcasts. Like and subscribe to the Rotogrinders YouTube channel. Follow us on the Daily Fantasy Football Podcast feed, and you can get all the shows that we are putting out there each and every week, including some with Mr. Tuttle 05, including some with Blender HD. All the guys over here at Rotogrinders putting out some great content for you on the YouTube channel and the podcast feed. Get on over there, like and subscribe right now. Okay, speaking of the chalk, Washington football team on DraftKings is 2.3. Eagles are 2.2. If you run your optimizer right now with those two teams, you're going to get a lot of them. How easy is it for you to press the X button on these guys? Or is the roster construction aid you're getting with this low price too much for you to pass up?
It's pretty tough to pass up. If I am passing it up, I'm just going up to the Raiders, who we then have as listed as the fourth highest projected ownership. I will say it will be interesting to see, because I'm definitely biased towards the Washington football team and think somehow they can still salvage a decent defense. I don't know. They've been terrible, especially against the pass. I will say that's potentially in their favor this week. Jameis is just not throwing the ball. They don't trust him to throw the ball. He's looked fine when they throw the ball, but they haven't very often. So I will be interested. Like, I see Washington football team. I still have previous biases thinking they're actually a pretty decent defense, but I'll be interested to see if the general public has quit on them being a good defense.
Yeah, I have not myself. I think that, a couple of tougher matchups here on the cards with Buffalo and the Chargers. Atlanta and New York Giants are certainly they're spots you would have expected something from them, really, in my opinion. So that's been a little bit disappointing. But I think this is a situation against Jameis Winston where you can tell me they're going to run the Taysom Hill off tackle as much as you want. I still think that there's some opportunity for mistakes to be made here by this particular quarterback. So I think you're live at 2.3. I don't think there's that much more you can ask for than a defense we thought was going to be one of the best in the league at a bargain basement price. Speaking of the Saints, I don't think they're too bad at 3.1. They're going to be pretty popular on this slate. And the Raiders, Justin Fields out there having a tough time so far. Raiders played a little bit above expectation on defense. I think that's a situation where we're going to see some ownership, but I think that's for good reason on DraftKings, where the price is a little bit easier to stomach. And then last defense I want to mention here, the Pittsburgh Steelers facing the Denver Broncos. I don't know. I have a pretty good feeling that they're going to get the job done here on the defensive side of the ball here. Denver missing They could be. Is Cortland Sutton going to play, Tuttle? That's one thing that I want to make sure that I get a grasp around, because if he's out, geez.
He was downgraded, and then Bridgewater kind of seems like he's trending in the right direction, unfortunately for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think you'd prefer to see Drew Lock here. But either way, I still think Pittsburgh's a pretty good play, even with Bridgewater in there. I just don't think they're going to have a lot to offer on offense. That's really the bottom line. All right, any other takes here on defenses, or can we get into the low-owned picks where you can give us the winners?
We can go low-owned picks.
All right, buddy, let's go. We've got quarterback position. This is a place where if you go to RG Premium, you can get Tuttle's opinions on low-owned options in the grind down. You can get various other people's opinions on the low-owned plays of the week. But for this segment, you're going to hear absolutely free of charge on this YouTube channel, Tuttle and I's terrible picks for players. We'll call it under, 5% at quarterback, under 8% at the other positions. Go ahead and give me the best quarterback play and those parameters.
Yeah, I'll give you two real quick at QB that are going to be.
Don't take mine.
I think they're going to be fairly popular stack candidates, which could drive ownership up a little bit. And then I'll give you one a little bit lower owned. But the first two would be just Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow. We talked about Burrow already with his, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase being excellent options on DraftKings. Cousins is a little bit more difficult just because Justin Jefferson's price tag is getting up there. But I do think with Dalvin Cook being limited, they'll just continue to throw the ball a little bit more often. The low-owned guy, the real low-owned guy that I would be semi-interested in is Ryan Tannehill. I don't know if it's just a thing where I just keep chasing Ryan Tannehill, but should have A.J. Brown in the back this week. Even just doing a skinny stack with A.J. Brown, I think is fine. Or if you want to throw Ferk Daddy in there too. We didn't mention him at the tight end position, but that's a pretty low-cost stack for decent upside and good leverage off of Henry as well. Okay,
good. You weren't. By the way, I liked both of those options quite a bit. Tannehill especially is going to be like 1%. I know, although I want to try to make some Tannehill teams, and I really want by the kind of teams I was getting this week as far as my selection here is concerned. The team that I like the best in terms of like really trying to get like an outsized upside as compared to the total roster is Derek Carr, because I can get that Darren Waller in the tight end position going, and then I can maybe just try to gamble on one of those other couple of wide receivers out there and to make a double stack with a bring back that I'll talk about a little bit later for the Bears. I'm thinking that Derek Carr, who has thrown for pretty good amount of yardage this year, the Bears defense, Tuttle, has played some pretty rotten opponents. So I'm not ready yet to crown them as any kind of a threat in terms of stopping the passing game here for the Raiders. And I just don't have a lot of faith that they're going to be able to be stopped here. And if I can get that outsized performance here with 3 or 4 touchdowns from Carr at 6,100, I'd be feeling pretty good about the rest of my team around him. So I'm thinking I'm going to play some Derek Carr this week. Anything else you want to mention here at quarterback?
No, I think we're good.
All right, let's get into the running back position where it's a little bit tougher to find good guys under the 8% mark. Did you find anyone this week?
Yes, I wouldn't say I'm like strongly into these guys. I will get my one take out of the way. Probably not actionable. I mentioned it on the Swolecast, and I honestly haven't followed the news up closely enough to see if this is even a possibility. But the non-actionable take that I have is that you want to check Patriots active list before this game starts, because Damian Harris might be semi-popular. If you see Ramondre Stevenson active, that should scare you a little bit. Because it would not be surprising to see like a Jonas Gray 4-touchdown game type of thing out of Ramondre Stevenson. I'm saying that in the sense that you're still probably not playing Ramondre Stevenson, but I would not be surprised if he just randomly came in and stole the show out of from Damian Harris.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not old, Jonas Gray was a player who came into a game. I think was a leg blunt at the time. There was another Patriots back that people was really super popular, and Jonas Gray came in. Nobody even knew who the hell he was, and he ran for like 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. And it was obviously something to be remarked because he pretty much ruined the chalk out of nowhere. And Ramondre Stevenson is basically that exact guy, except he's good. So you see Ramondre Stevenson, you might want to question your Damian Harris love. Who else you got here at running back?
Yeah, Oh, the Jonas Gray thing was so funny too, because I think that's like he showed up late for the bus or something and then didn't play another game after that. The other two that I want to mention real quick. One, I'm mentioning mostly because I'm really, really intrigued about how this goes down and this matchup goes down. Nick Chubb, Chargers versus Cleveland. I'm very intrigued to see if the Chargers are actually bad against the run and don't have the personnel to stop it, or if it's just like that's how they've game planned to start the season. And I think it's more a schematic thing. I think they've game planned to, hey, not let Patrick Mahomes beat us type of thing, where I think that they could actually be a lot better than the 5.02 yards per carry they're allowing this season. But there is the off chance that they're actually bad against stopping the run. And if that's the case, this could be a Nick Chubb spot. So he's one guy that I wanted to mention. The other guy that kind of like I had a light bulb moment was when I was writing up the San Francisco 49ers, and that's Eli Mitchell.
Yeah, that was my guy.
I'm sorry to steal it from you. He's
cool.
He's just super intriguing. It's because it's like they didn't really like Trey Sermon. Mitchell had a huge role in week 2. Like he was going to be the guy for San Francisco, got the injury. If he returns to being the guy for San Francisco, he's a smash play and he's going to be 1%, 2%, 3% owned, whatever. So it's just a matter of, did Sermon do enough to convince him that he's not completely incompetent and can steal some carries? I don't know the answer to that, which is why Mitchell's like a risky play, but the upside's there for sure.
So his athleticism is off the charts, right? And if you go look at what this offense looked like with Mostert, who is also very fast and athletic, what this offense looks like with Trey Lance when they get the run game going, good Lord, can a back go off, because you have to account for that guy. Trey Lance can absolutely do damage with his legs. There's no possible way you can sit there on those read options and just ignore the threat of the quarterback running. And that can make possible huge openings for someone like Mitchell. And of course, when you have explosive athleticism, you can take it to the house. So that's really the thing that's really a threat here for a guy like Mitchell at 5.2 is there's some definite explosion capability. So I'm right with you there at the running back position. He's not going to be that owned, and that's possibly a mistake by the field if he gets one of those big plays. Okay, wide receiver position. Give me one of your favorites.
Honestly, pretty boring takes overall here. If we extend to below 8%, then DeAndre Hopkins is the guy that I'll talk. Obviously has not been great, hasn't had the market share that we thought he would have, but I still think he's one of the most talented players in the league. It's only a matter of time before he has a monster game. So Hopkins will be my low-owned guy here.
Okay, Adam Thielen is my more boring take here. You're not going to see him with tremendously high ownership, and we're going against the Detroit Lions, Tuttle. I don't think that we're really that scared by what they've been putting up there in terms of a defense this season. We know that Dalvin Cook, we didn't even mention, by the way, in the entire show. Not necessarily at full health. If he is going to go here, then it's there's some chance they're going to have to dial up the passing game. And if they have to dial up the passing game here, Thielen is going to be the lower owned option between him and Justin Jefferson, at least in my opinion, just based on their recent performances. And I would expect that Thielen has a chance to do something like he did week number 1, get up there into the 20s or the 30s, which is really what we're looking for to try to win a tournament. Give me another take here at wide receiver.
Wide receiver, I also had written down like a Mike Evans, if you want to go with the Tampa Bay passing attack as opposed to the rushing attack. Marvin Jones
What about
Jr.
wide receiver cornerback matchups? Are you afraid of Xavier Howard?
I'm so afraid. And I do think, I do prefer like the Leonard Fournette side of that game. But I think the whole passing attack in general for Tampa Bay could go a bit overlooked here.
Yeah, you were going to say another name there?
I was just going to say Marvin Jones Jr., potential leverage off of Visca. He has been the better of the two to start the season. And then Brandon Ayuk would be the other guy. I would not be surprised if Ayuk did get a little bit of ownership with the Trey Lance pairings just because he's so cheap. Like the production wasn't there, but he's still clearly in the wide receiver 2 role now for them. So I do like Ayuk as well.
Hey, is Allen Robinson going to be like 6% owned or 5% owned or something like we have it right now? Is that really going to happen? Because I don't think a lot.
I would say lower. I have seen nothing about him. He's been terrible. I would say lower.
Yeah, sign me up. You want to try to find a guy who can get up into that 24, 25 plus DraftKings points, who's not going to have any ownership, then go ahead and get Allen Robinson. He's going to be my bring back in that Derek Carr stack for sure. And then, getting the Thielen and Allen Robinson team sounds pretty good to me as far as trying to get low ownership and high upside. I don't want to build the whole team for you, but man, it's going to be looking pretty good to me. Anyone else you got here at wide receiver? I could name 4 or 5 other guys here, but those are the guys that are the most attractive to me right now.
Yeah, I got nothing. The only thing I would add is like the field in general is going to be so short on the Bears after last week, and even Fields and Robinson. Like, cue it up. We've seen one game out of him. Yes, Nagy's an idiot, but like maybe he unleashes them a little bit now. Maybe he doesn't have a choice. Like last week, he actually had a choice. They were playing with a lead. Maybe that doesn't happen this week.
Yeah, don't play Nelson Aguilar, but also play Nelson Aguilar if you're like me. All right, tight end position. I got nothing here. Tight end's a little bit difficult. I mean, if I had to go ahead and say that there was like a lower owned guy that fits the bill. I mean, Kmet he's due, right? 2.7. I
chase him so much. So I'm on board. I have 3 takes here, but I will say just in general as a rule of thumb in terms of game theory here, like we talked about it a lot. Waller is the guy that can break the slate. After him, throw darts. So if you're seeing a guy that's highly owned, throw your darts elsewhere. Robert Tonyan, hopefully you get a touchdown or 2 out of him. I touted him last week. He did shit, but he saw 7 targets. Like, that's good for Robert Tonyan. If he converts those into 2 touchdowns, you're looking good. TJ Hawkinson. I love TJ Hawkinson if he was healthy. Don't know if that's going to be the case. Need to keep an eye on actives tomorrow and reports. And the other guy that I'm going to throw out there, I was actually extremely surprised to see this guy. I had a tag in lineup HQ at RG. Buy him for. Must be sharp, or he got to it before me. Dan Arnold. Okay, I'm down with this.
Yeah.
We have targets to go around. We didn't see a whole lot of Arnold last week, but that was because he was, getting used to a new team. And what we saw of him were actually designed plays to get him the ball, right? We saw, I think he got 2 screens in that game. So like he's athletic. Yeah, he's from UW Platteville. Yay, go Platteville, go Wisconsin. But yeah, they were designing and trying to get him the ball. And if that's the case again for 2,900, I would say his upside is probably higher than a lot of these other guys that we're looking at, like a Ricky Seals-Jones type of thing.
It's a situation where you go to the bar with a bunch of ugly dudes, and then all of a sudden you're looking pretty good because you look at the rest of those tight ends on the Jaguars and Dan Arnold. I mean, he's, They had Tim Tebow out there for a little while in Jacksonville this summer. So definitely a situation where he's the best dressed pig at the ball in the Jacksonville tight end room. The matchup's not prohibitive, and that is the reason why Eric Beinform has tagged him on RG Premium and the reason why Tuttle has selected him here on the ownership report. Speaking of, that's going to do it this week, Tuttle. We're done. Best of luck in your contest and best of luck of all the contests for everyone watching and listening out there. For Rotogrinders.com, I'm Chris Gimino. Go out there and win something.